Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Vintage Books Live. I have returned from many travels and we're kicking off again. New night on Tuesday nights. And I'm really excited tonight to have Anita Kelly, whose book, Something Wild and Wonderful, comes out on March 7th. And very excited to talk to her about this book and her other books and just chat about writing and rattlesnakes and all kinds of fun things. So we'll just jump right in. Usually, Anita, I start with the question of tell us the birth story of this particular book that's coming out.
So the birth story of Something Wild and Wonderful kind of came from a few different directions. So it is a love story that takes place on the Pacific Crest Trail. And I have hiked a small portion of the Pacific Crest Trail. And I've always just loved nature and hiking in general. So I knew eventually I would write some type of hiking or nature book. And then the genesis of the characters were actually really kind of inspired by some young people that I've worked with in education over the years, who I've been happy to get to know, but also like concerned about them and where their futures will take them. So this was kind of me, writing through those worries for those students.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a combination of both of those inspirations.
And so the Pacific Crest Trail, was it just because you've done part of it, or would you just needed a long trail and the Pacific Crest Trail was the ideal candidate, or was there a particular reason that you chose that one?
Um, yeah, well, the Pacific Crest Trail is the trail that I've had the most experience on. Like I haven't done any of the other, I haven't done the Appalachian Trail or the CDT or the other big ones that big hikers do. And I've always just been really drawn to, so even though the portion of it that I've hiked has been mostly in Oregon, but most of the book actually takes place in the Southern
Yeah.
California
Yeah.
portion, because I've always just been really drawn to the desert and find it very fascinating and terrifying and beautiful. Like Alexi, the main character, is kind of terrified of the desert, as he should be. So yeah, I feel like I only really write books based around things that I know or that I have experience with. So like
Yeah.
my first book, Love and Other Disasters, was based around food because I really love food. And so my next book was kind of like, all right, well, what other thing do I feel knowledgeable about?
Yeah. So did
And
you
that
spend any time in the parts of California? I mean, even though you didn't hike the trail there, have you spent
Mhm.
time down in that area? Because it is real different down there than it is up here,
Yes.
obviously. So it's just a
Yeah. I've really only done a small portion of hiking down there in like the Joshua Tree area. And it was beautiful. So for a lot of the research for this book, I really relied on like hiking guides and also like YouTube videos. Like there are so many
yeah,
amazing hiking
yeah,
vlogs where people really like take you through the trail, like step by
yeah.
step sometimes.
It's kind of
So
like
if you never
Google Maps for the for the
yes,
PCP. Yeah,
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 and some of them are really beautiful. But then it always like when you're actually hiking the trail, like I never know how people that do these amazing hiking vlogs do it because you have to bring all of this like charging equipment for your cameras and
yeah,
like all this
yeah.
extra weight in your
It's like
pack.
you can't chop it off like you can a toothbrush.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
I admire the people that are doing that. But yes, I watch a lot of videos in addition to my like actual paper research of
yeah,
hiking
yeah,
guides and such to get a picture of what the trail down
yeah.
there is
Well, you
like.
could really tell. I was like, either you've been on the trail or you've seen it somehow because there's a lot of like visual description and stuff. So, like and it's very like it makes you feel like you're on the trail. So I was like, so how did you actually hike it, or how did you how did you get all the good juicy details? But you're clearly a hiker. Like that must be part of um because, you know, you can't, I don't know, there's just something sort of lived in about the hiking parts of it that you can tell
Uh-huh.
somebody who knows the glory and pain that is hiking longer distances.
Yes, yeah, a lot of the painful parts of the hike came from my own experiences,
Yeah.
um, of just the exhaustion and like I had a lot of stomach troubles when I was on the PCT. So like Alexi has stomach troubles, and like when one of the first trials they really have on the trail is trying to cross this scary snowbank. That was basically taken from the first scary snowbank I had to traverse on the
Yeah. Yeah.
PCT, which I did not handle well. Um, yeah, and so a lot of
Yeah.
that, general backpacking experience, anyone who's been backpacking can understand.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I have been glad that, the early readers who have read it, by and large, aren't necessarily hikers. Actually, I get a lot of responses of like, I would never want to do this, but I enjoyed the read.
Your
But I
book
have
was
got,
good though.
yeah, no, actually, which I find to be like a really big
Yeah.
compliment. But I've also gotten some readers who are like, yeah, I've been on parts of the trail, or, my husband has, and he said that, it read really accurate. And so,
Oh, that's awesome.
um,
That feels good. After
yeah,
you've
because
done all
for
that
some reason
research.
I was like I really wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
hiking portions were accurate. And
Well, it's the
so,
kind of thing that somebody will call you on if it's not like,
right,
and then you'll feel,
right.
yeah. Yeah. So I promised everybody I would ask if you've seen a rattlesnake in real life.
So actually I have, not on the PCT,
Yeah.
but and not in Southern California, but here in Washington State, one day when I was hiking in the Catherine Creek area in the gorge, which is a
Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful place. But I was hiking, and I've been there a few times, but I was hiking with my wife and my best friend there one day, and it was actually my best friend that almost stepped on a little tiny rattlesnake,
Oh, oh.
that then like slithered to the side of the trail. Yeah, and so it wasn't like a big rattler like
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
pictured Alexi and Ben dealing with in the first chapter of this
Yeah.
book. But
Yeah.
it was really interesting to me because even though it was just like kind of like a small one,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
rattle, because it rattled at
Yeah.
us, was still quite loud and like
Yeah.
distinctive. Like there was no question like that is a
Oh,
rattlesnake.
yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And they're very
and
fierce, even though they're little, they're
yes,
like, back off.
yeah, and actually my best friend that she's one who almost stepped on it, she was like done. She's like, okay, we're turning around, we're going back. And it was only like a little bit into the hike, so but
Oh
I was like,
no.
fair,
Oh no.
that's fair.
Yeah. They just don't want you to bother them. I
Yeah, she
grew
was
up in
pretty
the on
cute.
the eastern Washington, central Washington, so I had to
Yes,
ask about the rattlesnakes
you
because
are
I have
familiar.
not actually, honestly, from growing up over there, I've only seen them a handful of times. You know, they like
Yeah,
to, they don't really want to interact with you, so
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
actually kind of rare to see one. So.
Mhm.
So I'm going to
I have.
read something to the audience. They're
Mhm.
going to switch away from this book specifically and just talk a little bit about the writing that you do. And I was looking at your website, and it says you write romance that celebrates queer love in all its what did I say? Infinite. Sorry, my handwriting is bad. Infinite possibilities. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to just talk about why that's important to you and why that's something that you strive to do in the books that you write.
Yeah, and it is something that I am passionate about, and just kind of a way of writing romance that works for me. Because I do write romance, and typically in queer romance, at least historically, people like writers and readers have been kind of siloed into like I like to read gay male fiction or like lesbian fiction,
Mhm.
and like that's all you can do. But I feel like there's so many different aspects of
Yeah,
queerness that I
yeah,
like to explore. And so I like writing different gendered pairings. And like the first book had a non-binary character, so kind of exploring gender in general and different facets of sexuality in general. Because I have found that with each thing I write, like there's some different aspect that I can kind of hone in on and
Yeah,
explore
yeah,
in that book. So like this book kind of is a more I don't know, it's like it tackles themes that have been tackled, for a long time in the queer
yeah,
community. It has to do with faith and being
yeah,
disowned by your family after coming out, and things that are not new, but like things that for this book, it made sense to me that this was what I wanted to explore.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas in the first book, I kind of explored, yeah, like gender and accepting yourself. And then the next book, I'm like, it's a sapphic book, and it's kind of about like not accepting or like rejecting labels completely and trying to figure out where you
yeah,
land on the LGBTQ spectrum. And there's just like
yeah.
all different things that you can always explore in a
How has
variety
that,
of
I'm just
stories.
curious, as an author who has, an audience and who has people reading the books, like what kind of, without like making it too personal that it would be obvious,
Mm-hmm.
not without, talking about someone specific, like what are the kinds of responses that you've gotten from people? Like, how has that been received? I guess the question is that I'm trying to formulate is,
Overall, very positive and very well. I mean, I was very nervous. Everything I publish, I'm very nervous
I
about, and I
think
always
that's just the
I
nature
always
of the beast.
picture the worst.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like even actually before I started writing fiction, I used to write for like an LGBTQ entertainment site, and so like I've done like writing and media critique in the LGBTQ community for a long time, and I know like how vicious like it can be.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
yeah, each community is kind of always its
yeah,
worst critic. And so I always kind of picture like the worst things people can say. But so yeah, with the first book, Love and Other Disasters, I was worried because yeah, the one character who is non-binary is more like trans masc, and their story is not necessarily my story. And so I was worried that people would say like, what gives you the right, to write this trans
yeah,
character? And
yeah,
but I really didn't I mean, I got maybe a couple pieces of
yeah,
feedback from people who basically told me that they didn't think I did it right. Like I didn't do the rep right,
yeah,
which I'm
yeah.
expecting. But overall, the feedback was just like so lovely.
Oh, good,
And
good.
people just being really glad to see a character that represents them, that they hadn't seen before. And same thing with this book. I mean, it's still not out, so who knows
Yeah,
what
yeah,
the feedback will be. But so far, the feedback has been really great. Like I was worried that people would be like, why are you writing this book about these men? But yeah, if anything, people have really connected with Alexi's journey because of his religious background, or
yeah,
because of
yeah.
he's neurodivergent. And so yeah, and so people have overall just connected
Yay,
with the
me
different
too.
representation. And so yeah, I'm always like
Yeah,
have the worst expectations basically,
yeah.
and then the
Well, I
feedback.
think that's probably I think
Yeah.
that's pretty normal.
But yeah, but then
Yeah,
overall, overwhelmingly, the feedback is just
yeah.
super kind.
And I
So
honestly was just curious because I'm just so pleased to see there be more and more and more voices, because I think that, when we, so like since we're, 95% used books, and then we've got our little section of new books in the front, when we have, Black History Month, or Jewish History Month, or Latino History Month, or Pride Month, or whatever, like we
mhm.
make displays, and we'll make a display with new books, and the new books that we try to bring in, because we're working so hard as a store to try to be very diverse and represent all different kinds of voices. Usually in the new book section, I don't have a problem pulling together display. There might be some time where a book has rotated out. And it's like, oh shoot, we should have kept that one in longer. But but I think I'm often struck by, when I'm doing the used book displays, how much harder it is to find that, and that realization that we, yes, we are slowly, not fast enough, but slowly making some progress, because one thing I find
Yeah.
really interesting about the LGBTQ writing community and specifically, is like, we still have a LGBTQ fiction section that's essentially like a throwback from maybe 20 years ago, when
Hmm.
that was a separate thing, right? You have
Hmm.
all your normal books, and then you have this tiny little, LGBTQ fiction section. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, I said, do we still need this? Like,
Right.
but yeah, it's just, it is. And I think that the reason I brought that up about your website is that really resonated with me, that it is, I'm so delighted to see an effort being made to represent all different kinds of
Yeah.
people in books. And
Yeah, and I really think it's changing fast and getting so much more diverse, and it's really exciting. Yeah, because like queer romance in particular, historically, like the most published was, white gay men stories.
yes, yes,
Um,
yeah.
and and
And even
now,
that was really sparse and sort of its own little genre that
yeah,
most people pretended really didn't exist. It was kind of like you had to know where to go to find it.
yeah,
So
yeah. And now, like, and I feel like that's been true in adult and YA
yeah,
fiction,
yeah,
but now kind of, sapphic stories are kind of on the rise.
yeah.
But even beyond those two binaries, like I've read just in the past, I feel like every new book that comes my way, like I'm sent for a blurb or whatever, I'm like, oh, like I've never read this story before. Like I've never
Yes,
read a book like this
exactly.
before.
Yeah.
And so like I read one by my friend TJ Alexander, who is another non-binary writer, that's coming out later this year. It's called Chef's Choice. It's a super fun, just
Oh,
like
neat.
fun
Yeah.
romance. But both of the main characters are trans. It's like a trans for trans romance, which was really great to see. But, and I say all these things, when I say all these things, I mean published traditionally,
Yeah.
because in
Yeah.
self pub, there's been all
There's
kinds of stuff
been,
like
yeah,
forever.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but just today, I finished a book that's also coming out later this year. It's called All the Right Notes, and it is another queer gay male story, but it's written by a Filipino American
Oh,
gay
nice.
man author, and so the characters are Filipino American, and well, the love interest is Japanese American, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Asian immigrant experience, and just like seeing a very specific, diverse story like that I hadn't read before,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just seeing that representation getting better and more. Because like when it's not just like when being queer isn't the only like exciting different part of it, then you
Yes.
can get so many
Yes.
different layers of
Yeah.
like
No, I
beyond
think,
just
uh,
being out, like what other stories can you tell
yeah.
within that queer experience.
Yeah, I think that that's the thing that's I'm so excited about too, is that it's it's the recognition, I think, in especially by the traditional publishers, I think that identities encompass so many different things. They just,
Hmm.
they encompass neurodivergence, neurodiversity. They just encompass, LGBTQ, gender, sexuality, race,
Hmm.
nationality, like all these things.
Right.
And which it, sort of makes it this infinite possibility of, yeah, the canvas, because you can just,
Hmm.
like, well, we got this character from this background who's got this and who has this and who does this, and I think it just makes it so exciting, because it then there opens up all these possibilities of something fresh and new.
Yeah.
And then, to a more important point, it allows all these people who haven't been able to see themselves on a page and have had to transpose for so long um see themselves on a page. The neurodivergent aspect I was super excited about to see in this book, because that's the another area that's personal for me and my family, and we have lots of that in my family. And not didn't really see it much, even like just over the last 5 years, I would say, or even less. There wasn't a lot of it, and I'm finally seeing that it being celebrated overtly. I mean, I think there was a lot of coding for that, but it was never sort of, well, this person's autistic, or this person's they're ADHD or whatever. And now it's just been, well, that's part of this character. And
yeah, that's why it was important for me. I mean, I don't really consider it as a spoiler, because I think he's pretty clearly neurodivergent throughout the book. But yeah, it was important for me to get on page that Alexi is autistic. Like he's diagnosed at the end. So it's just kind of like mentioned briefly at the end. But I did want to have that on page, so that yeah, because there are also lots of people, increasingly, just people that I know that are, getting diagnosed with things like autism or ADHD or any type of neurodivergence later in life. And so I think and it's just kind of like answering lots of questions of like, oh, okay, that's how my brain has always worked. And now I know why.
Yeah, I got diagnosed at, I don't know, 48 or something. Like, it was just a couple of years ago. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more neurodivergent, and also like more just disability in general on page. I think there could be a lot more too,
great.
but
yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is something that I had written down earlier that I've just been kind of noodling on myself as I read more books with LGBTQ representation in whatever form that it takes. I've noticed, and I'm just curious what your take on this is, in just from what I've noticed, and I could be totally wrong, but it seems like the books that are having an LGBTQ plus characters are also the books that you're using their stories to bring up stuff like Alexi dealing with his family, or mental health struggles, or neurodivergence, or that kind of thing. And I don't think it's not that it's never present in a, like a cis straight romances, but it's typically not part of the drama. The drama is usually coming from somewhere else. And I'm curious your take on why that is. I personally, honestly, have found myself reading more of the queer romances just because so much of that resonates for me, that I'm like, well, these are better. They have more stuff in them that I like. And I'm just curious whether it's just like a facet of the community having to deal with stuff in a way that maybe the cis straight community doesn't have to, or maybe baggage left over from maybe when you didn't talk about that stuff in the romance book. But
right. I do think, when it comes to queer literature, especially, I mean, I do think there is an overlap of queerness and mental health. Like, I think, and neurodivergence too. Like, I think there's just a greater, I mean, I don't know statistically. I'd have to like ask a sociologist if there actually is a greater convergence of queer people that also have anxiety or neurodivergence or anything like that. But I would say, I think I've seen a greater exploration of that type of stuff in queer romance, but also just kind of in any romance that is about minorities somehow. Like, I've also read a lot of wonderful, like Black romance, or romance by people of color that also tackle mental health and anxiety and things like that, far more yeah, than like a straight white romance typically would.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think it might just be because those communities are more aware of that
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they, have gone through more struggle and are just kind of more aware of, how their body reacts to things. And so, yeah, but I agree. I do think it's
Yeah.
a
That's interesting.
greater issue in queer books and other books like them, because it's just a general struggle.
Yeah.
It kind of
Yeah.
goes hand in hand with accepting yourself
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
everything else that goes with that.
Well, that was kind of my thought is, I mean, I would imagine there's some obvious things that kind of go with that would lend themselves to that being a part of the conversation, but I just find it really refreshing. Um, Allison's The Charm Offensive was the first arc I ever read after I started working um, for Vintage, and I really hadn't read much, of anything for a long time. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And being so touched that that was even a topic, and then sort of diving into that genre and realizing, oh well, like everybody that's writing these books is talking about this is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
And I think
really
it's
appreciate
so,
that.
yeah, I think it's so great too, like the variety of, yeah, like the depth of things that you can talk about. Cause I feel
Yeah.
like before I read Allison's books and also our friend Timothy Janowski's,
Oh yes, yeah.
like so they both feature demisexual characters, which I
Hmm.
hadn't really
Yes.
known about before.
Yes,
I hadn't really
me
known much
neither.
about
Yeah.
like the ace like spectrum at all. And
Yeah.
so I feel like through reading those, I've learned more about
Yeah.
being ace and wanting to research that more. And yeah, and so like even within, your own community, when you read other people's perspectives, you're like, oh, like this is so, I've never thought about this before. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's just been it's fun to read a really fun rom-com and still sort of be engaged about things that really matter,
mhm.
or that you didn't know, or that are really interesting, or you're like, oh, that's really interesting, I'm gonna go look that up. So yeah, it's been very fun. And you said we have about 4 minutes left, and I want to make sure I asked you what's next, and you mentioned that another book, so I don't know how much you can say about it. I know sometimes you can't say too much when you're depending on where you are in the publication process, but
Yeah, I never really know either. I sometimes kind of say what I want
yeah.
and then wait to see if I get in trouble. But yeah, so I've just submitted my third book. So the book that comes after Something Wild and Wonderful. It's called How You Get the Girl, and the main character is Julie, who is present in the first two books that I've written. She's London's twin and Ben's best friend. But so this is her book. It's kind of a
Yay.
sports romance. It has a lot to do with basketball and coaching a high school team. So there's some education aspects in
Yeah.
there. I'd say it's definitely lighter than this book. More actually kind of rom-commy and vibe, while still dealing with serious topics because I
Yeah.
can't
Because
help myself.
life. Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm looking forward to diving into the editing process with that and seeing how it turns out.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. I love that they're so different, like that they have such different worlds that they're dealing with. That's really fun.
Yes,
Well, thank you.
I enjoy that too, but I'm always
Yes.
like,
Yes. So
again,
you don't get
nervous.
bored.
Like, oh, people are going to be used to kind of the serious tone of Something Wild and Wonderful, and then I'm just writing this like funny basketball book, and they're going to be like, what?
That's okay.
But yes, I hope people enjoy all of it. So
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. If you wish to pre-order Something Wild and Wonderful, you can do that through Vintage Books. Anita has offered to sign and personalize books. If signing can happen anytime, even if you come to the store after the book comes out on March 7th. Personalization, if you have a personalization request, we would ask that you would get that in before March 2nd so that Anita has time to actually do it before the book comes out. So yeah, come on down or go online and order a copy of the book. And congratulations, and we're really excited for it to come out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the support.
You're welcome.
Local indie bookstores supporting you is really great. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too.